Welcome. Good
See some familiar
afternoon.
names.
Yes, I see
Yeah.
that. Welcome, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Galveo. I'm joining you with my colleagues here, my co-host, Stephanie Johnson, our fabulous librarian here. And while we wait, I would ask you, if you don't mind, just dropping in the chat where you're joining us from today. I am joining you today from the beautiful, sunny Florida. Okay. And if you don't mind just dropping off where you're joining us, we'd appreciate it. Also, while we at it, okay, while we wait for everyone, we would ask you if you don't mind just using the Q&A for any questions that you may have. You can be on, off camera, the choice is yours. We appreciate you being here either way. Please also remember to mute yourself so we are able to hear the presenters as they are speaking, okay? And also, following the skill up, we would ask you if you don't mind doing a quick survey for us at the end of this skill up. That would be greatly appreciated. And as a reminder, this skill up is also being recorded. Okay. Well, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my other two colleagues, Dr. Becker and Dr. Tribble. At this time, they will be presenting, can I actually do this research? The IRB discusses feasibility. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for attending our session today, and thank you, Dr. Gavao and Stephanie Johnson, for being part of our presentation, helping us through the Academic Success Center, the library, to reach all of you and to present this information. So the way that we typically do our presentations with the IRB is that I present. Dr. Tribble, who you may see on your screen, is going to be writing responses in the Q&A and will inform me of any uh, questions that might be really beneficial for the group. So typically I'll stop every few minutes and ask Dr. Tribble if there are any questions that he would like to share so that we can all hear the answers to. And that usually helps us with the larger conversation. And you can follow up with those questions in the chat. You can ask new questions. Please feel free to use that as a live question presenting module or mode. So we'll also have the chat so that you can put in information like where you're calling in from, as Dr. Gavao said. And also, if you have any technical questions, you could throw those in there. We'll be monitoring both of those as a group as we present. Again, we have some people coming in, so just thank you again if you're here. We're going to get started, and we appreciate the Academic Success Center for hosting this event for us. So what we're going to present today is, can I actually do this research? The IRB discusses feasibility. And as many of you have seen already, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. As many of you have seen already, the description of the webinar is about feasibility, about actually being able to complete your research. We have good ideas, and sometimes those ideas are not actually achievable due to several constraints that may operate upon our research and the way that we think about going about our inquiry. We're going to talk about things like topic selection, special populations, sociocultural context. You can see the list here. I won't read it all to you. But please do use the Q&A function for any questions that you have. And we'll do our best to reach all of those questions. So I'm Chad Becker. Uh, I'm an IRB education analyst, and I have Dr. Tribble, Kelly Tribble, here with me today, who's also an IRB education analyst, to work in the Q&A, and you'll hear him speak a few times today as well. We're going to we've recorded the webinar. It's going to be available on the ASE Skill Up page. I believe I'm not misstating there. Let me know if I am. And we'll also have that on our web page at the IRB. We also have a YouTube channel, so it's not just that you can find them on our website, but you can also bookmark our YouTube channel for help materials in short video format. We have the Q&A function. Please do ask those questions. Typically, we do try to send those Q&As out, so I will provide those to the ASC. If they do not come out in the follow-up email, then they are available on our website, on our webinars page. So if you've not been to our IRB website, you'll hear me refer to it a few times today, and then webinars is one of our pages that you can find on that site where you can find the recording and the Q&A. So we're going to start today off with a little bit about what the IRB is before we get into our content. And we find that that's useful for people to orient themselves toward what they should expect when they work with the IRB. So the purpose of the IRB is to protect the rights and welfare of human subjects in research. And that really is our main goal, if not our only goal, and everything we do underneath it branches out from that. And that derives from a federal regulation called the Common Rule. This is a book, a hyperlinked PowerPoint presentation, and when it comes to you, if you look at it on our website as a PDF, these hyperlinks will all be active, and you can take a look at that common rule if you're interested. What isn't an IRB? Well, we are not going to help with methodological aspects, with any academic aspects of it, certainly for programmatic aspects related to any students in the room. Those would be more for your chair and committee to attend to. Unless, of course, what you're proposing to do would increase risk by itself. So sometimes people propose to interview people in public or something like that, and we would say, well, that presents risk that a typical interview wouldn't. So let's talk about that and try to fix that. Just as a side note, we are gatekeepers. Everybody knows that. It's hard to be the gatekeeper, but we work with people. And I think, and Dr. Tribble can probably, with complete certainty, I say this, and hopefully he does not contradict me. I can say that in the 4 years or 3.5 years or so that we've worked together on the IRB, we have not rejected but one. I think there was one that we said you just can't do that. And they ultimately changed it a little bit, and off they go with their study. So it's a matter of getting it right. It's not a matter of yes or no. And that's something important, I think, for everyone to consider as they move into working with us. So we have some services and resources, and they're open to everyone who is an NU community member. So essentially, if you have an NU email address, you can take advantage of our services and resources. And quite honestly, our webpage is public, so anyone around the world can access that. For student PIs, and we call PIs principal investigators, our PIs. So you'll hear me say that a few times throughout the presentation. That's essentially anyone who's submitting an IRB application. So that would be a faculty member, that would be a staff member, that would be a student in any capacity, whether they're a doctoral student, a master's student, undergraduate student. If you are submitting an application, you are the principal investigator. And for dissertation students, we just want to make sure that everybody knows that they don't have to be enrolled in any specific course in order to take advantage of our services and resources. So don't feel like you have to wait till a certain time in your program. Certainly discuss this with a faculty sponsor or a chair that you might have in order to proceed through your program in the appropriate way. But you can always come and take a look and get prepared for the IRB at any point in your program. You can attend our group sessions, our office hours. You can obviously attend webinars, things like that, to prepare yourself as you work through making big decisions about your upcoming study. So Here's our preview for today. I'm going to walk you through very briefly our resources and services. We're going to take a look at the steps prior to application, and then we're going to get into feasibility. So I'm going to define that and give you some examples of how researchers sometimes bump up against barriers in their research that aren't necessarily barriers that you can't get past. They're just barriers that you need to explain to us how you're going to overcome. And that's typically the case with all of these different human subject categories that we have listed here. We're also going to talk very briefly about the application timeline and the review process. Again, these are all hyperlinked. So we have the IRB website, and then each of these different lines on this slide have a hyperlinked component to them that's underlined and exclaimed at the end. So as you can see here, getting started with us, we have information about what you would want to do right away. We can learn requirements that the university has, as well as federal requirements on that page, as well as any special guidance for populations that might not be typical. Um, for those of you who uh, do have typical populations and are doing typical things with them, interviews, surveys, you're going to be focusing on preparing those IRB documents. So that's a huge part of your application. Obviously, you need to get into the system that we'll talk a little bit about today, but you do need then to augment your application with the appropriate materials. And typically, people have several uploads that they need to do. So we'll talk about those a little bit, and you can find more information there. You can certainly come to our group session, um, getting approval. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it. Getting approval with the IRB. Pretty basic stuff. This is what we want you to do. We want you to get approval, and we're going to help you do it. So, preparing your documents. This is something that we have several resources that will help you do. We have links to our services that I'll talk about in a second, as well as help materials, which are plentiful. There are written help materials, there are short videos, there are modules that you can work with your way through to learn the components of a basic IRB application. We also have that YouTube channel that I referred to, and we have newsletters that you may have seen come out in different capacities. If you're a faculty or staff member, you've received them. If you're a student, possibly they were forwarded to you. You may see them on the Commons as well. So our services then are group sessions. So we do have the Getting IRB Approval group session. And we also have an intro to IRB application group session that will be here for a little while until we replace that with asynchronous modules to help everybody learn at their pace and on their schedule. We know it's not easy to get to group sessions, and so we do want to offer those as well as asynchronous materials. We have office hours in case you have specific questions, and we encourage you to look on our webpage, read about our office hours, do the things that you're supposed to do before you come to the office hours, right? And then if those aren't getting you where you need to be with your application and with your study, then come to us and talk to us. We're always here, but we do want you to kind of go through some of our processes before you utilize that service so that we attend to the most atypical and important kind of comments and situations that people have during those office hours. So we kind of have a hierarchy of resources and services that we ask that you kind of take a look at and think about as you move through our process. None of this is required, of course. I think it's important to note that the only thing that's required is your completed, your approved dissertation proposal and your application with any supplemental documents, and you can take advantage of any of these resources and services that you believe would be helpful. Of course, we have webinars, and that page that you can link to there has all of our old webinars on it, so you can watch any of those should you want to. Read any of the Q&As and take a look at any of the PowerPoint presentations that have been given in those webinars. So we've been doing this for a handful of years now, and we have quite a few built up. All right, so before we get into feasibility, let's talk a little bit about the application steps. Dr. Tribble, I don't imagine there's too many questions at this point, but
Nope, your intro is going well. I guess everybody's understanding it, and I think we're okay at the moment.
thank you. So, getting started with the application, we want to make sure that you're completing your city training. And some of you have done this already. If you're a faculty member, you may already have it. If you're a staff member, you may already have it. If you're a student, you may have completed it in a course. And for some students, this is when you complete city training, is when you're getting ready to submit your IRB application. So we have links on our webpage about city training. And as I said, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to any of you in the room because you've probably already experienced this at some point in your program. We do have institutional policies that we ask that you review to make sure that you're not running afoul of the way that we do research here at National University. And then we ask you to consider the feasibility of your study. So that's what our main goal is today, is to talk about that one in the middle. We've referred to the group sessions, we've referred to office hours, and then we do have our application system. It's called Cayuse, and I'll show you a little bit about that later. So we have our link to the Getting Started page that will help walk you through those 5 steps. And at the end of that page, we have a Cayuse Quick Start Guide, which will help you get into the system and begin your application. So how to log in, create a study, start and submit your application. So that's just a brief summary of the steps prior to application. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about what happens after you submit. So, feasibility. This is our topic for today of human subjects research. Now, this involves not only if you interview somebody, but if you were, say, gathering archival data that has already been gathered and you're not talking to a human being at all, you're not surveying anybody, but you are using data from human subjects. So it's important to think about research with human subjects as any type of those kinds of studies that would involve either collecting data directly from humans or any study that would use data that was collected from humans at some point. And it refers to the practicality and likelihood of successfully completing a study. So we want to make sure that you're thinking about this before you get too far along in your program and in your project, in your research study. Again, we have a lot of different people from the university that come to our webinars, so we try to be as kind of broad as possible. And if you're a faculty or a staff member, you are your own faculty sponsor, and so you need to make sure that you have an idea of your research that is feasible. If the research bumps up against some of these issues, we will discuss them with you. For students, obviously, you're going to go through your committee, your professor, your instructor, your faculty sponsor, however your program is structured, and they're going to help you a little bit with that. But also then we will be checking to make sure that these feasibility issues are not part of our critique of your study. And that involves whether you can conduct it successfully, ethically, and given the restraints and constraints and resources available to you. So let's talk specifically about what that means. The definition of feasibility as it pertains to human subjects research is essentially, can you conduct it? And do you have any issues in your study that relate to topic selection, special populations, and these other items that we've listed before that we're seeing here again? And we're going to go through each of those individually. So before we do that, we have a tool that will help you, and it is part of our Get Started page. This is a screenshot of the top of the form that you can use to ask yourself questions about things that relate to feasibility. And we'll be going through those. So in our Get Started page, make sure that you do step 3 that I showed you earlier, which is to take a look at this form, ask yourself the questions that we are posing, and see what your notes are, right? See if there's any complications or anything that might stall you or prohibit you from doing your research. The first of these is topic selection. So sometimes researchers will choose a topic that's too broad, too complicated, too time consuming, right? Possibly too risky. And any of those can complicate the time that it takes to do a research study. Now, for the faculty and staff, that's complicating enough, but for students who are tied to program timelines, that can be even more difficult to negotiate. And we want to make sure that you're getting a chance to think about this before you get too far into your project so that you can tweak it as necessary to make sure that it is something that's feasible. So here are a few things to consider regarding topic selection. I'm not one to read slides, even though I may have been doing so already. But this is a big one, and I'm going to let you read it a little bit. I'll talk, and then we'll move forward. But these are some things to consider. So time, right? Access. It's important to know if you can actually access the population and how you'll do so. Uh, you may think that you have access to a population that you don't. So sometimes we see this. There's people will say, "Well, I have these emails because I work here," and we'll say, "Well, they're not your email addresses; they're the company's email addresses, right?" So you have to ask for permission to use those, even if you have them in your inbox or saved in your profile, because they're not yours. They're the companies or the schools or the universities or the institutions. So there are complications sometimes with accessing the population that people sometimes don't think about before they get too far into their program and they realize, oh, the person that I needed to ask if I could access those emails has now told me no, and I'm too far along in my program, or I'm enough along in my program where that presents problems, or far enough along in my research study. So think about that. Do you in fact have access? If you have questions, office hours, the group session, these are the places you can come to think about that. We have a site permissions page on our website that also has information um, and will help you interpret these kinds of issues. And then, of course, the IRB is always interested in risk. So, how risky is the topic? Sometimes people don't think their topic is as risky as it is. And they think, well, that's fine. I can just ask, they're adults. I can just ask them about anything and they'll be fine. Well, that's not always the case. You know, the IRB will say, well, depending on your population and depending on the types of questions you're asking, this might be a high risk study. And we have processes for that. It doesn't mean that you can't do that study. It just means that you might have to take a little bit longer in the process. It might require a full board review rather than just a review by an analyst because the level of risk is higher based upon your population or possibly the questions that you're asking them. Well, that was our first substantive slide, so let me stop and ask if there are any questions.
Hey, Chad, I'm answering one now about someone who's basically expanding. They've got an approved study, it sounds like, but they're trying to expand the recruitment area. And typically that's a pretty easy modification that they would submit. But they are expanding it from United States only to basically multiple English speaking countries. And I was just wondering, I don't think it would categorize this as international research since they're not targeting a specific country. They're just basically saying, hey, if you live in one of the below English speaking countries, you're also welcome to participate. Do you know if that would be categorized as international research or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, there's two components to it, right? So the first one is we want to make sure that people understand that this is not uncommon to have to modify your study after it's been approved because you're having difficulty with recruitment. It's something that we see regularly because we have a lot of people come through who are inexperienced researchers and they don't realize until they get started that they need to think about their recruitment a touch more or reach out in a different way. In this particular case, expanding the breadth of who they're asking to be involved. So that's a really important component. We do that. It's not a problem. It's a simple form. It usually takes a day or two or three to get approved by the IRB, and then you can change your recruitment strategies moving forward. That's if you haven't already approved. application. For someone who's just considering this and thinking, and for the other scenario where they've changed their recruitment strategy and they're recruiting more broadly and inviting international people into the study, it would not necessarily make it an international study. So this is what Dr. Tribble was asking is, does that necessarily make it an international study? And it depends. If you or any of your research associates who are on the study are in an international country, then it would be international research. If you or any of your research associates were utilizing resources that exist in an international country, then your study would be considered international research. But if you're just putting something out on the internet through Facebook or any other number of means by which we can communicate digitally with people now, um, and you're doing so from an American-based computer, and you're putting it out there on the World Wide Web, and people from other places that are international want to volunteer to be part of your study, and they don't have to come here, you don't have to go there, then it's not an international study. So we do see a lot of people reaching out globally for participants, but because no resources of the host nation are being utilized, it is not considered an international study. So if you need to do that, or if you want to do that as part of your research, make sure that you are doing so in a way that doesn't utilize those resources. So Facebook or any other digital means typically are kind of global or worldwide, and they are not considered resources based in any particular country. So you can do research that involves people from other countries that isn't quote unquote international research because you have not utilized any of those resources of that country. So I know that's a little bit nuanced, and hopefully that's a reasonable answer to the question. Certainly follow up if you have any more questions, whoever asked that or anyone else. And we'll move on. So, special populations can sometimes present feasibility issues. And we have vulnerable populations, and these are federally mandated categories. Children, of course, so minors, anyone 17 or under in the United States is considered a minor. Incarcerated people and some pregnant people. So it depends. Pregnant people can, of course, engage in research, but sometimes it's risky based on their pregnant status. So not all pregnant people are considered vulnerable, but we do need to take a look at a study that would involve pregnant people. And typically, these special populations require a full board review. So you heard me mention that earlier. That's a little bit longer of a process. It's not insurmountable, but it would take some time, and you would need to consider that based upon your own timeline, whether it be a professional timeline, a personal timeline, or a programmatic timeline. So think about those populations as special that might need a full board review, which meets monthly. Right? So you can see how it might take a little bit of time to get through the process if there was a back and forth with the full board. Whereas an analyst typically goes back and forth with you in a week's time. So something to consider, certainly not to discourage good research, but to help people with the efficacy of their studies. Some other populations that may not be considered vulnerable by the federal government would potentially introduce risk into your study and therefore give us cause to, ask you questions, ask for revisions. And that would be people that fit into the categories listed here: non-mainstream racial and ethnic identities, non-mainstream sex and gender identities, non-mainstream cognitive, intellectual, or developmental abilities. These may all require full board review depending on the structure of the study, your investigator experience. There's a couple of issues, right? So thinking about those and asking questions ahead of time. All right, special population slide, Dr. Tribble. Anything in the Q&A at this point?
Nope, we are good to go.
All right, so sociocultural context becoming increasingly important in the modern world. And essentially, what are you asking from your participants? What are you asking them to disclose? And could that disclosure be risky for them? And sometimes just disclosing your ethnicity is risky. Sometimes in research, just disclosing your age is risky. Okay, so that personal information can put people at risk if it gets out beyond the study. Right? So if confidentiality is breached in some way, that could be dangerous for those people and their livelihood, etc. So those are things that we think about. It's not, is it likely to happen? It's more, is it possible that it could happen? And we take a higher we have a higher bar when it comes to that than some people do when they think about the research they're doing. And then when they come to us, we say, oh, we have a higher bar. We need you to think about this differently. And so we want to sometimes make sure that you need that information because it's not always the case. Does that help answer your research question? And I think that's a hugely important component of any research study is what you're doing to gather data. Is it extraneous? Can you get rid of it? Do you need that information, or can you answer your research question without collecting that personal, identifiable, potentially risky information? DEI, of course, is becoming under scrutiny in American society and around the world. And we've seen archival data that was once available no longer be available. So you might want to check and make sure that you have access to the data sets that you think you have access to if you're doing that type of archival or secondary data type of study, because websites are going away and data sets are going away. And you may have seen it 6 months ago, and it may not be available anymore.
Chad, can I jump in on that?
Yes, please do.
I just wanted to mention, just because I've seen some of this pop up a couple of times in office hours with different students, Chad's absolutely right. It's getting even more and more of a controversial topic, and a lot of websites are going away. But also, and I have no actual evidence to back this up, but I noticed a few participants were trying to recruit people who are in public jobs, like they're school teachers or community college instructors, and their title of their research and the purpose of their study specifically is about, some DEI aspect of, equity or access or inclusion. And for whatever reason, and I suspect it's because there are people in public positions in a state that is not very DEI friendly, and they are specifically calling out, here's a study on DEI I'd like you to participate in. They're having a really hard time getting people to sign up to participate in their study. So just you can keep that in mind, perhaps along the lines of DEI. I think it's great. We should all, in my opinion, we should all be studying how to make our society more equitable, but at the same time, realistically and feasibly, depending on who you're trying to access, the population you're trying to access, there are some people who are in public jobs who feel like their jobs would be at risk if they, participate in a study like that. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you for that. Very important to consider when it comes to feasibility, right? You want to get your research done, and then you have to understand the context in which you're doing that research as best as you can so that you can do the best research that's possible within those parameters. All right. Moving forward, if there's any questions, Dr. Tribble, please jump in. I'm going to move forward to investigator experience. Now, this is important because we want to know if you can do a study that's not going to spin out of control and cause risk or hurt or pain, anguish to human subjects. So would you be proposing to do a study that you're not quite qualified for? Sometimes when it comes to trauma, sometimes when it comes to other experiences that are related to kind of aspects of people's lives that are difficult, depression, anxiety, sexual abuse, these kinds of things. You may not be the best person to do that research due to your experience, and that's something that we judge. And it's hard for students who may not have a lot of experience, but of course, a lot of our students do. especially our dissertation students. Many come from careers where they've had a lot of experience. So that's why we ask. We want to know what your experience is with this topic so that we can determine if you yourself will be able to mitigate any risk that occurs, not only in your data collection instruments, your questions, your surveys, but while they're happening. If something happens and you have an event where somebody is, really traumatized by your research, it's important that we know that the investigator knows what to do and has a plan for that potentiality. So if it's a risky subject, vulnerable population, we're going to be looking into your experience as an investigator, and there is a component of the application where you need to describe your experience with the topic. Now, typically for benign topics, all that you need to put in here is I've taken some methodology classes and I've written a literature review, right? I mean, most topics for social, behavioral, and educational research are not risky and do not require special experience to do, other than just being a student or a faculty member or a staff member who is at a certain point in their research. So we don't want to scare people, but we do want to acknowledge that some studies you just can't just say you're going to do it. And we might say, well, who are you, and are you qualified to do something like that? Okay. So investigator experience, and this could apply to these kinds of situations where children are involved, vulnerable populations, a special population as described earlier, and risky questions. So think about that. Think about your topic. Think about what you're asking people to disclose, and think about your experience handling those situations if you're moving into these more vulnerable and special populations. All right. Anything on the wire?
Nope, we are good.
I don't know if you can hear the thunder in the background, but we've got it bad here in Terre Haute. So
Ooh,
if
yikes.
my power goes out, I apologize, but I can see the flashes out of the corner of my eye, and I'm surprised that you can't hear them. But we are in Tornado Alley here, so anytime this happens, we always get a little freaked out. But we're gonna move on and pretend it's not happening. So site permission can also be a barrier toward completing your study. So when you think about feasibility regarding site permission, can I get access to sites? And sites aren't always physical, right? They can refer to virtual sites as well as private resources. And what we see frequently is that people are trying to recruit in a closed or moderated social media group, but they don't have permission from the moderator, manager, or owner of that social media group. If you're posting to your own, kind of wall or page, then that's your resource and you can do that. But of course, your reach is going to just be who follows you. If you're trying to say on Facebook, post a recruitment material in a large group with several 100,000 people that's moderated or mediated, you may not even be able to, for one, because they safeguard it, or two, they may have restrictions and will take it down right away and say bad on you for putting that up, right? So there's nuance to this that needs to be understood from a researcher perspective is, do I have access to that? That can be a private contact list as well, as I had referred to earlier, emails, say, of a school. You're a teacher at a school and you think, well, I teach here, so I know all of my colleagues. I have their professional email addresses. I'm just going to email them. That's not always possible, very unlikely possible, because those are not your resources. Those are the resources of the school, the district, and you would need to ask a principal, possibly as a superintendent, if you can utilize those resources for research. So just because you have the resource doesn't mean you own the resource. And I know that sounds a little confusing, but that's about as plainly as I can put it. And you may need to ask for permission to use that resource that you may already have access to, but is not yours to use in that way. And that's the key component. You use it for your job, you use it for research, those are different things. And we need to make sure you're asking for the appropriate permissions from those resource holders if they're private. Oftentimes, a site has its own IRB, and that can create complications with site permission. We have procedures to move around that, but we do need you to consider if there is another IRB that you're going to be dealing with at your site of research, even though you're trying to get it through our IRB because you want to publish it and you want to, be your dissertation or your course requirement. So think about those things, and they can extend the timeline certainly if the IRBs need to communicate with each other, which we do. We're willing to do. We will also take almost any IRB's word for it. So I know how that sounds, but if they are on the registry, then and we have a special registry that we all belong to, if you're an approved IRB. And so if another approved IRB reviews your research, we usually rubber stamp that and don't hold you up in the process. But you need to know, do you need our approval first or do you need their approval first? And that's where it can get complicated. So if you have a site with an IRB, make sure that you're inquiring about that to us and you know exactly what you need to do in order to move your application through. US government or military sites, complicated research. There are several hurdles to get through. And again, not to discourage, but just to help you understand that there is usually a delay when working with the government trying to get approval for research. So take that into consideration. Research the chain of permission that might be present for your study, and then ask us any questions that you have. And then, of course, international research that we talked about earlier. So collecting data or recruiting on the ground in another country, that would be international research, and that would include then a requirement of permission from some entity in that other country, typically an institution, a school, a business, something like that. So if we need to see that, then that, of course, will take time and resources, and we want to make sure that you know that that's something you would need to do and account for the time and the energy that that would take. All right. Any questions, Dr. Tribble?
I had one interesting one come up, and I think it's taken a slightly different direction, but it was probably worth mentioning. There are some people that are, after they've been approved and they have trouble recruiting and collecting data, it's taking a lot longer than they thought. And so one of the options that they might believe is available to them is to maybe just let me just not sign up for any more classes until I get all this data collected and analyzed, and then re-enroll and take a break essentially. And my understanding is you must be an active student and enrolled in classes in order to collect data. Is that correct? Is that what you understand?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So,
yeah, that's an easy answer.
yeah,
That's a
please,
yes.
yeah.
That's a yes.
And well, there's also somebody just asked the question, what about recruiting in the commons?
So we have a special site permission form on our website. If you go to our website and you go to the page on site permissions, you'll see there's two templates on the left-hand side. One is a general template for asking for site permission from any site. And then one is specifically for asking for permission to recruit within National University and utilize its resources. I will tell you, though, that the Commons is never a resource that is available to use for recruitment. So that has been a hard and fast rule since I've been working with the institution, and I don't see it changing. That is a different place, and recruitment could take place through getting lists of emails in other ways that utilize National University resources, but the Commons would not get you approved. So you would not get a site permission approval from our provost if you ask to recruit through the Commons. So there are other resources at NU that you could ask to utilize. And that may be something that you also have to ask a dean for, right? So the provost may not be able to supply you with what you're asking for, but they are the ones who would give you permission to then go ask the person who you could get the resources from. So if you're looking for an email list, you're likely looking to be in touch with a dean's office or a director of a program's office, but you do first have to get our provost's approval. Our provost is called our institutional official, our IO, and is in charge of those components. So hopefully that answered that question. All right, well, we're going to move on, or 15 minutes or so. Hopefully the people that have questions are asking them. I'm going to continue on. I have a few more substantive slides and then a few slides of more general information. Site permission, we've talked about this a little bit, but now specifically is, do you have a site permission letter? And can you get one? So thinking about those things is one thing, actually doing it is another. People will say, of course, I work there. Of course, I'm going to get approved for researching at this site. And then they find out that, in fact, no, they don't want that. Oh, my lights are flickering. Sorry about that. Um, and then you can't move forward with your study as it's structured. So you'd have to tweak it in some way. And again, I just want to remind people that there's lots of ways to tweak studies. It may not be the original initial great idea that you had, but if that ends up running up against feasibility issues, then any tweaks that you can do to expedite your study, I imagine, would be something you would want. And that's called the learning process. So don't be discouraged if what you're trying to research runs into feasibility issues. This is what happens to people, especially people who aren't experienced researchers. And there's always, almost always, a way around it. Okay. And we will help you find the way around it, not to subvert it, but to structure your study in a way that is not risky for the people involved, and that goes through the regular ethical channels of permission and consent and those kinds of things. Okay, so possible gatekeepers could be principal, superintendent. Just depends if you're doing school research, which a lot of our students do. Think about that. If you're talking about a company, have you spoken with management? It's not recruiting just to ask somebody if this was something that they would allow at the company, at the school, at the institution. That's just feeling out research, and that's good research. So ask some people before you decide that this is what I'm doing and I'm definitely going to be able to get access to it. Maybe you're not going to be able to get access to those resources, and moving too far ahead would cause you to lose time. Remember that the NCU researcher role is different from roles that you might hold at the site. So I mentioned that earlier. Just because you have access to emails does not mean that you own that resource. And then we do have a system set up where we will give conditional approval, and then you take that to your site and they can review that and say, oh great, it looks like NU is okay with this, and so we're okay with it. And then sometimes the site wants to review it first and give you an approval, and then you provide that to us. And again, as I said earlier, that expedites the process because we typically trust other IRBs that are official. So something to think about, again, your role, and also then if there's another site IRB. That leads us to having multiple IRBs. So if you do have a situation where there all are multiple IRBs, it is typically that they want to approve it first, and then you show that approval to us as you apply. And we've also seen it the other way, right? Where they need evidence that we have approved the study so that they can then review it and approve it, hopefully, on their end. So take a look at that information. Think about that if you do have a multiple site, if you do have, or if you have multiple IRBs or a site permission that is requisite upon having IRB approval first. These situations are not uncommon, especially when it comes to working in the field of education. And I think this is our last feasibility topic. Before we get into it, Dr. Tribble, let me ask if we have any questions on anything up to this point.
No, we are pretty good.
We're doing
I've
pretty
answered
good.
a few in the Q&A and a few in the chat, but they're pretty well taken care of at the moment.
That's great. Thank you for your help today. All right. So our students in the room, our scholars in the room who are working in programs, you may have some program requirements that can add another layer of feasibility issues to your study. So time, right? Can you collect your data in time? Can you gain access to your participants in time? Time, you see a recurring theme here. It's about time. We know that people's programs are limited. They're taking courses that are a certain number of weeks long. We want to make sure that if you're doing research as part of those courses, whether you're an undergraduate, a graduate, dissertation student, that you are thinking about how long it's going to take and does that fit within what you hope to be your programmatic timeline. Are the activities too long? Will the participants actually finish? Or will you be left with sets of incomplete data because you asked too much of them? These are things to consider for any study, but for a student scholar, this is most especially important because this can delay your time and program. So just generally, have you thought about approval, considering recruitment, gaining consent, collecting data, completing your data analysis, getting your site permissions? Are there any IRBs? And you might have as little as 8 weeks to do this in some programs. We have seen some master's degree programs where this is it. This is a course. You have to go through the entire IRB process in one 8-week course. And if you don't get a good grade in the course. Dissertation students in some programs have supplemental courses that they can take. And how many of those might be required before you have enough time to complete your study. So these are components that are more programmatic based for students in the room. All right, feasibility. So that's kind of it. Those are our topics about feasibility, and there is a lot to think about in that regard. Some of you may be thinking, oh, I do have some of these issues in my study, and hopefully that will help you interpret how long it might take and how possible it is to actually complete your research. And some of you might be thinking, whew, I dodged a bullet on that one. I don't have anything to do with certain categories of feasibility. Good news. Either way, we're here to help. And as I said, there's always a way through a research idea that protects the human subjects and still gives good data. For those of you who then get to this point and submit your application with any supplemental documents that might be required, site permissions, recruitment materials, consent materials, come to our Getting IRB Approval group session to learn about all of that with Dr. Tribble. And then you submit the big moment. And this is then the process from that point forward. So I just want to show you that because a lot of people have questions about our process, and we try to present it each time that we talk with folks. So we have our submission, but for students in the room, you also then have a faculty sponsor or a faculty chair who also is attached to your study. You'll actually insert their name. You'll do through a search engine in the application. You'll find them, and that links them to the application, which means they get to see it and comment upon it and essentially certify it after it's appropriate. That's that second step there. Once your faculty sponsor or your chair, or if you're an independent researcher, if you're a faculty or a staff researcher, once you submit it and certify it, then we move to the third step, which is the triage, we call it kind of at the IRB, where an administrative official looks at it to make sure that it's complete. And so it's not a review, it's just, there aren't glaring errors that would precipitate us sending it back before review. But that might happen at that stage. So if our administrator sees something that's missing, obviously, then they're going to send it back. And that helps you because that saves you time, not having gone through a 7 to 10 day review just to find out that you left something out, right? So we administratively review them quickly to make sure they're complete And then we move them to the step 4, which is an IRB review. And that's where our professional analysts come in and take a close look at your study. If fully acceptable, great. On to step 5. If not, you can see those little arrows. Changes may be requested. So most people have to go through a round of revision, maybe 2 before they're approved on average. Hopefully not more than that. And each of these review periods can take 7 to 10 days. So that's our general timeline, is about a week to 2 and those are business days, so for a review. Once that's all taken care of, whether that's on your first try or on your second try, moves into post review, and a determination is made and a letter is sent. So those last 2 steps happen very quickly. Once the analyst determines it's ready for approval, we then issue a determination letter to your chair, your faculty sponsor, or you, or any of your co-PIs that you might have. And that comes through your official National University email address. And that's something that you are responsible for keeping track of. So make sure when you get your determination letter that you save it to somewhere, preferably the cloud, so that it doesn't disappear, so that you can use that for uploading to your doctoral record for some people in certain programs. And if ever you need to present that to any university official for proof that you have IRB approval. All right, so that's our process in a nutshell. The timeline, again, for that first triage is about 2 to 3 days for an administrator to look at your application to determine if anything's missing. And then if it's deemed incomplete, it'll be returned to you. If it's deemed complete, it'll be assigned for a 7 to 10 business day review by an analyst. And that's estimated. Right now, we're running at about 9.5 days with our transition and the bulk of work that we have seen. So take that into consideration. 2 weeks for a review is not atypical. Sometimes they're a week, but you want to make sure you're accounting for how that process might shake out, and maybe that it might take a round or 2 of revision before you have a fully approved study, which is typical at any institution for any researcher, not just for students. So it's not necessarily that you've done a poor job, it's just that this is complicated and there are quite a few components to it. All right, we're running up against our time, and I just have an important reminder. Our Getting IRB Approval group session and our Intro to IRB group session, we also have those office hours. Please do consider taking advantage of those resources. And of course, we're always available through email. We are quite responsive. 24 hours is usually all we need in order to reply to an email. And of course, I wanted to put our homepage there one more time as it's a linkable PowerPoint presentation. So I think we've gone through all the questions, and I don't think we have any more. Is that correct, Dr. Tribble?
That is correct. That's correct. Just as a reminder to everybody, the chat and the Q&A, I'm downloading and saving, and that'll be part of what's available for download on our website.
Thank you for that. And Stephanie Johnson is going to finish off our presentation today, as I understand it. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you coming, and we really appreciate the Academic Success Center for hosting our webinar today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker and Dr. Tribble. You guys gave us so much information. That was incredible. Everyone, thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate your presence and your questions. Please feel free to fill out the survey for us at the end. We would appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Skill Up. Until then, take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.